And the message today is a little interesting. And it is, in a way, kind of fulfilling a promise that I made a couple of talks ago to you. As the October theme is Cosmic Connections. And the theme was Bridge Over Troubled Waters, which I think everyone remembers the sort of message and feeling from that song. But the message kind of migrated into this area of forgiveness, and therefore I subtitled it "Forgiving Builds Cosmic Connection." And so forgiveness is a form of healing. Yes, it's a form of course correction. And there are many cultures that healing and forgiveness is a communal activity. I can't really say the United States is one of those cultures, and maybe that's something that we can aspire to. And, it's recognizing that we are inextricably connected and that everything and everyone is an emanation of the divine. And so the question is, are you a bridge over troubled waters for your own healing, for your personal healing, and for the healing of others and your community? And then the important piece is, how can you build those bridges that are, as Bertha pointed out, and some others too in their comments, that there is sort of an unconditional acceptance and inclusion of others and for yourself. So this is the part where I was fulfilling a promise, and we all remember this particular one. And I said that I would come back to that theme of forgiveness in a future talk, and lo and behold, here it is. And the most powerful part of that particular part of the song was freedom from the unforgiveness. Now, there is an ongoing process, at least I think for me anyway, I could be alone in this, of forgiving, and therefore the feeling, the emotions, the triggers that I am healing around or from relate to what we would just call forgiving or forgiveness. And it's recognizing too that I'm on a path of spiritual self-discovery to feel better about something or some aspect of my life. And I think that's part of why we are gathered here today, because we are joining each other on this path to feel better about someone or something in life. So freedom from unforgiveness might be something that is, a little contradictory, but it's also saying that this forgiveness part is a path to true liberation. Now, I wanted to, there are a couple other, the liberating part of forgiveness is a very common theme. So I'll share a couple of other slides with you right now. And I don't know how to pronounce this gentleman's last name, but he is credited for saying this: to forgive is to set a prisoner free and discover that prisoner was you. And Catherine Ponder says it, or Nelson Mandela says that resentment is like drinking poison and then hoping it will kill your enemies. And then Catherine Ponder says it this way: when you hold resentment toward another, you are bound to that person or condition by an emotional link that is stronger than steel. Forgiveness is the only way to dissolve that link and get free. So there is a theme here about forgiving or feeling unforgiven in some way, whether that is around yourself or someone else, is holding you back, that is somehow limiting you, that is somehow imprisoning you on some level. There's some aspect of flourishing in your life that is sort of bounded by your ability, my ability to forgive. Now, there is a recognition here around forgiveness that everyone makes mistakes. And of course, the biblical term that we sort of inherited in this culture is sin. And sin is really amplified out of proportion sometimes. But sin really is derived from a term that has to do with missing the mark, that you didn't do what you intended to do, that you made a mistake. And I think it's a common part of this phase of your soul's journey, my soul's journey, this Humanville phase, that folks make mistakes, and folks make mistakes that tend to harm or injure or affect someone else in the process. So that's just a natural part of this part of your soul's journey, that mistakes are made and that those mistakes get corrected. Along with correcting those mistakes is to include that part of your psyche, that part of your soul that might feel wounded as a result of those mistakes. And it's easy, I think, for most people to contextualize, to put in perspective that what someone else did or what someone else said is why I am hurting. It's why I'm not feeling good. That's easy to understand, but also understand that that perception, though very real to you, those emotions, those feelings, that woundedness, that's very real to you, but the other people to whom you attribute that may not have a clue. They may not know that what they did was harmful or hurtful in any way. Either way, you're still feeling harmed or wounded or hurt. And in all these instances, the one who feels bad is you. The one who feels bad is me. And therefore, it's up to you to make the choice to heal that hurt, to bind that wound, to set yourself free from something that may or may not have been a conscious choice on your part, whether this was due to engaging with someone else that ended up hurting you, or whether there's something else you took away from a circumstance or condition where you feel hurt. Now, there is this idea of making amends and being contrite, being apologetic. And even when this person to whom you ascribe your hurt recognizes their error and apologizes to you, that might be helpful, that might feel good. That's still not your forgiveness to do. Do you see the distinction between the two? It's part of the process, right? But it's not all of the process. They might say they're sorry. You might say, I accept your apology. And there's still forgiveness work for you to do around that in order to be completely free. As Reverend Sunshine, I think, talked about last week, where that person has clear passage in your mind and in your heart. So that's kind of the good news, bad news. Your forgiveness and therefore your freedom from whatever that hurt is your work to do. And so making that choice and taking that responsibility for yourself, you're not going to be dependent on someone else to heal that wound. You're going to be able to take that healing into your own hands and move forward with your process, your spiritual journey, your unfoldment. And like anything else that is part and parcel to this spiritual journey, that process for you begins within. Now, there are a lot of urging along this spiritual journey, no matter what your pursuit of faith might be, to be forgiving. And a lot of it just kind of stops there, right? It's like, well, okay, I'm willing to forgive. That's an important step. I acknowledge there's something to forgive. However, I'm not sure how to do it, or my attempts at forgiving in the past have kind of fallen short. And so, at least one of my objectives today is to give you some tools to work on your process of forgiving. And but even Ernest Holmes, has this to say, and I'll bring up this slide for you. And he says, this is from Help for Today by Ernest Holmes. Forgiveness means reconciliation in spite of estrangement. It means reunion despite hostility. It means acceptance of those who have been unacceptable. It means reception of those who are rejective. Forgiveness is unconditional, or it is not forgiveness at all. So he sort of spells out the binaries of reconciliation, of reunion, of acceptance, and reception. Yet not a lot of detail as to how to get to that point. And even in the Jesus teachings, Yeshua teachings, many know this from Matthew. It says, how many times should I forgive? Up to 7 times. And Yeshua said to him, I do not say to you up to 7 times, but up to 70 times 7. And we in the West will do the math and figure out that's 490 times. So by 490 times, it should be complete. But really what Yeshua is saying is this is an ongoing process. And Martin Luther King Jr. said, forgiveness is not an occasional act, it is a constant attitude. And I think that's really where it falls into our spiritual practices, that it is an aspect, forgiveness can be an aspect of any particular spiritual practice that you engage in, whether it is meditation or treatment or affirmation or journaling might be a powerful tool to assist in your forgiving. Visioning, and the way visioning might work out is, Spirit, show me the different paths, show me a different perception here, and be willing to receive what that new perception might be. Seeing a spiritual counselor, having someone join you objectively in your spiritual journey, that's an important spiritual practice. Being of sacred service can sometimes change your perception, where you just give yourself over to assisting and helping others. And that moves your mentality away from perhaps feeling harmed in some way, or wounded or attacked in some way. And then joining in beloved community as we are today, or even giving as a spiritual practice, can shift your thinking out of that harmed state, that aggrieved state, into a different consciousness that can move onto a freedom from that hurt and a healing from that wound. Now, what are the components? So here's the step by step, right? At least some of it. Now, mind you, my experience with forgiveness, I think I was like everybody else. I was like, all right, well, I'm willing to forgive. I'm willing to see this a different way. I'm willing to not be hurt again and again, to be triggered again and again. And then how do I do it? And the first teaching that I came across that actually had a how do you do it was A Course in Miracles. So a lot of this is informed by A Course in Miracles. And some of this just actually comes from the psychotherapeutic community too, because, their position, the therapist's position is one and the same. It's like if a person is continuing to tell a story of what they call grievance, whether it's, somebody treating them badly or them treating themselves badly. And I think that that's an important component. You may have this perception that somebody else harmed you, they don't, and therefore part of your process to figure out, am I hurting myself here, or has someone else actually hurt me? And I think if you're anything like me, I tend to be harder on myself for these kind of things. I tend to keep myself on the hook for a lot harder and a lot longer than anyone else might. So that's an important first step. Now, looking at the circumstances and conditions around which you have been hurt, or you have been reminded, or you have been triggered. And notice really if there was an overt act involved, whether it was a step that you took that may have harmed somebody else, or a step that someone else took that may have harmed you. It's important to try to get objective around that. Did this really happen the way I thought it happened at the time? And as you gain clarity around it, obviously you begin to untether yourself from the hurt and the harm from that. And it's also a first step toward empathizing, whether it's with yourself or another. If you can get objective around the circumstances and conditions, the overt and covert acts or steps that were taken, it's going to be a little bit easier for you to understand that temporary frame of mind that may have contributed to that hurt or that harm. And it is temporary. That's not the truth of your being. The truth of your being is the essence of peace and joy and love and compassion. And in those moments of hurt, you have separated, you have forgotten, you have disconnected from the essence of your being. You have disconnected from that peace and love and compassion that is really encoded in your spiritual DNA. So first step, look at what went on as objectively as you can, and that will change every time you revisit this. It'll improve and become clear every time you embark upon this process of forgiveness. Second step is to get very clear about how you're feeling. Oftentimes, a hurtful situation will bring up all sorts of other things that are coming up for healing that had nothing to do with that particular encounter, right? So it is very clear to say, all right, here's some old stuff that came up. Yeah, I'm going to work on that too. But in this particular instance, what I felt, what are the bad negative emotions that have come up? And it's important to be clear about that. Just to say you feel bad is very difficult for you to be able to switch that to feel good. It's a little bit easier if you break it down and you say, well, I felt attacked, or I felt cut off, or something was really tight in my gut. It's important to articulate as best you can the specific emotions or feelings that have come up for healing. All right. And as you become clearer about those emotions, each emotion that you identify, you can then begin to link or unlink, as the case may be, those feelings, those emotions to this particular circumstance or condition, right? Again, in the general case, it's easy to overwhelm yourself to say, oh, well, what's coming up here is a lifelong list of stuff that I'm working on healing, versus just the things I'm working on healing in this instance of forgiveness. Because again, your objective here is to get free from this particular occurrence or this particular condition or this particular relationship. And oftentimes that occurrence, that situation, that relationship is with yourself. And as you do that, in other words, you look at the activities, you articulate the feelings and emotions. You begin to unhook the feelings and emotions that had nothing to do with it and directly link the feelings and emotions that you had to it. And now you begin to go a little bit deeper. And this is the part that really you might have to visit several times. The degree to which you are blaming or feeling blamed, the degree to which you are shaming or feeling shamed, the degree to which you are regretting or feeling regretted, or resentment. How much is that blame, shame, and regret? How much of that are you identifying with in this instance? Because that blame, shame, and regret is the consciousness of a victim. You are not a victim unless you choose to be a victim. So in recognizing where you're blaming or shaming or regretting, you're going to be able to say, I choose differently about that. I'm not a victim. I have dominion over my life. I am imbued and surrounded by a living spirit that is loving and compassionate. And therefore, I choose to be loving and compassionate towards myself and any others that have come up for me to forgive. And as you do that, you're going to notice that some of the edge of the feelings and the emotions begins to shift. You know, once you make that choice to have dominion over even just this little area of forgiveness that you're working on in this moment, your mind is going to begin to open up. You're going to begin to soften around the hurt feelings and the negative emotions. And I do need to bring up that there are situations where people, and I'm sure nobody here, but they intended to hurt somebody, right? And you happen to be the one that was in their, you know, in their field of view, in the vicinity at the time. Now, whether or not you're giving them the satisfaction of feeling hurt, that's again a talk for another time, right? But the point is that this is another reason that it's important for you to do the forgiveness work, whether or not this other person involved had an intention to harm or not. And if they had an intention to harm, that's still nothing you're going to be able to change. And even if they professed their healing around this, you still have that hurt to process, to heal, that aspect of forgiveness. And so up to now, you've now identified everything about the negativity associated with this call for you to forgive. What has happened metaphysically, and this is sort of from A Course in Miracles because it's easier in some level to explain this in binaries, and everyone knows that I'm not a fan of binaries. Life is a shade of gray, not an either or. But from A Course in Miracles point of view, what has occurred, whether it's you inwardly or in this relationship, is that fear was chosen instead of love, that separation was chosen instead of connection, that someone or everyone forgot who they were at their essence. And at their essence, you and I, everyone is pure spirit. And so it is this process called atonement from A Course in Miracles that wants to sort of, because we read about, well, you can't change the past, you can't alter history. Well, sort of you can. And metaphysically, I think this is where the power of atonement comes into the forgiveness process. Because at that moment, when someone chose fear over love, or someone chose separation instead of connection, or someone forgot who they were as a loving offspring of the divine, in that moment, circumstances, conditions, important to have that recall to say, right there is where I made a bad choice. Right there is where I made a mistake. And whether it's this at the hands of someone else or at your own doing, that is the point at which you choose again. That is a point to say, all right, given the ability to reshoot that scene, to have another take, so to speak. We are in LA, the land of fantasy, but this is a metaphysical reality, I feel. And I've used it many times, and it's very important in my forgiveness process. I want to take myself back to that moment in time in my mind, have every experience of it I possibly can, and choose again. So that if I'm ever faced with that similar circumstance and condition, I'm going to choose love. I'm going to choose connection. I'm going to choose to follow the guidance of my heart. I'm going to choose compassion. I'm going to choose the loving thing, the caring thing. I'm going to choose empathy. I'm going to take a breath to try to put myself in the other person's shoes, even if it's my own shoes, right? And that represents a turning point. So to take that moment to atone, having done all of those other steps up to that point in forgiveness, then you can turn, you can transform, you can move to a constructive, positive opposite of your previous choices. And that is that transformative moment. Now, this might come in giant leaps or small steps, but forgiveness, as Dr. King pointed out, is a constant attitude. And if you get to that point and you are called to make amends, then you do what's appropriate to make amends, right? You know, the forgiveness that occurs may not be a reconciliation, but at least one party and one person in that process has moved out of a disconnect to a connect. They have moved to a connection that was at least temporarily broken in that moment. And as you do that, you are reclaiming your personal power. So that blame, shame, and regret, you're elevating out of that. And then finally, as you tell this story to yourself and others, the first time you tell this story without any forgiveness work, it's going to be tinged with a lot of emotional recall, and it's probably not going to be all that accurate. But as you do this forgiveness work, it's important for each time you do this to retell your story so that it is now becoming a story of overcoming. It's becoming a story of transformation. It's becoming a story of empowerment. It is becoming a story of correcting course. It is becoming a story of true liberation. And once you do all that, start all over again. Lather, rinse, repeat. So with empathy, you can begin to have a genuine compassion for yourself and others. You can genuinely have that connection. And ideally, this actually increases the flow of love. This increases the flow of spirit in your life. And you're truly able to bless the world as you are blessed. And so it is. So I thank you for that today.